Thanks all for your time joining today. Today's session, we're going to be looking at strong authentication facilitated by passwordless MFA. And today's session looks at focusing on the critical infrastructure industries. So I'm Gavin Brown. I am Director at IC Consult. And today for the session, I'm joined by Samir Kirouani.
Hi guys, good afternoon. My name is Samir Kirouani. I'm the Senior SC for Secret Double Octopus, looking after the EMEA region. Thank you.
Thanks, Samir. And I'm also joined by Shin.
Perfect. Hey, Gavin, thanks for having us. I am really excited about this session because there's so much to cover here, right? And as we'll dig into is you know, this whole thing around critical infrastructure, especially given sort of the temperament in the world is so critical. So thanks for having us.
Definitely. Well, no, it's great to have you both on the webinar this afternoon. So housekeeping is always a little bit different on a virtual call. I don't think we're going to have any fire alarms, but if you do have any questions as we go through, please feel free to use the chat function. We'll look at those as we go through. We've also got some Q&A time at the end of the session today. We're estimating the session will be around about an hour, but certainly if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in, and we'll pick those up as we go through. But we'll get started. We've got quite a bit of content to go through, and we can also send out some slides afterwards as well. But thanks again for your time for joining. So IT Consultant, Secret Double Octopus, we've been working together for a long time now on the solutions, looking within the industry of passwordless, and there's a huge amount of experience and capability that we're going to draw on today, focusing on the critical infrastructure industries. But to set the scene for the discussion today, passwordless is the advantages of passwordless are clear for any security portfolio. And certainly speaking with customers, what we tend to see as a general view is that everyone agrees that passwordless is a great solution to move ahead with. But we see that fewer of those organizations have actually started that journey from password free to passwordless. But it's certainly something that is definitely a hot topic, certainly when we look at some of the incidents that we'll cover over today. And today's session, as we said, focuses on critical infrastructure and how passwordless MFA can help improve the security stance for organizations.
Yeah, and Gavin, I think that's the important part here, especially with that whole theme, is the remote portion of it. Because I mean, as we learned during COVID and how it continues is that getting to these facilities where production or the research is being done is really difficult, and we have a myriad of different kinds of workers inside of it. And today, remote access, how do you get into these environments, becomes so critical, and from a productivity perspective as well as and I think that's the thing is can you do it in a secure manner, right? And I think your point about passwordless being one of those important parameters is in our opinion very dead on.
Yeah, and I think the aspect to that, Don, isn't it, that actually there's been some really high profile incidents with certain brands across all industries with breaches and hacks. But I think the interesting thing with critical infrastructure is that many of us use that every day. We use that multiple times a day. But I'd suggest that the industry is one of those industries that we don't really think about until something goes wrong. And I think that's the aspect of protecting against that. In its name of the industry, it's critical. It's critical to our everyday lives as well. So if we can perhaps move on to the next, we'll go through a couple of examples of those. So as we said, lots of high-profile examples, but there have been some very important breaches that have certainly hit the headlines in critical infrastructure. And there's actually been quite a few examples of those, and some of those sort of hit the headlines more than others. Some examples, in February 2021, there was a US water treatment facility. Someone gained via a password to a dormant system. They were able to access one of the control systems, and were actually able to change the chemical makeup of the water that was going to be for public consumption. So, again, very important. Something, again, of water systems that we use all the time. We use them every day, but until something goes wrong, that's really starts to matter. You've also got the aspect of foreign actors as well, intentional cyber attacks. So, you know, a very prominent example at the moment is Russia with regards to Ukraine's infrastructure, both sort of pre and post invasion. But there's also one where we've got the picture here, is the Colonial Pipeline. So this is another example of where systems have been looking to access the infrastructure control systems or ICS systems. This was a very high profile incident. This oil pipeline, it's 5,500 miles of pipeline. It's based in Texas, originates from Texas. The pipeline moves oil from refineries to industry markets. So many of you probably would have read some of the reports on here. It supplies both domestic and commercial customers with automotive fuel, heating oil, and jet fuel as well. But this was so high profile that President Biden declared a state of emergency because of the nature of this. Now what had actually happened in this case is that a password had been breached or taken from another data breach within Colonial in another area of the organization. And unfortunately, that password had been used in multiple systems. And in this case, it then allowed access to the ICS in one of the areas. It actually shut the pipeline, or the pipeline was shut down to try and stop the breach. But it's an extremely important example about how the use of the passwords and gaining remote access, typically, as you said here, Don, it was able to allow remote access for a bad actor rather than an employee. And I think here what we're looking at is, you know, some very, very serious implications. You know, we're asking employees who access these systems, be it, you know, looking at different levels of privileges, to hold multiple passwords with lots of complexity. We're asking those passwords to be unique, and they have to be to a certain standard. And it's a very difficult task to retain that security for organizations as well. But here we can see, you know, the implications, as we said before, of what happens when you have an incident on critical infrastructure. So Don, if we could move on, if that's okay. So we've seen what happens, but then we see what's happening after and what's used to try and prevent this. So there are a number of security mandates that go across all industries, but there are also mandates that focus specifically on critical infrastructure. I'm sure you can, and even some, as you can see here from the White House, mandating and specifically calling out multi-factor authentication for systems. And this looks across the board, not only in the US, but also in Europe. So we're looking at both the network and information systems, NIS, and we have NIS2, but also looking at the critical entry resilience as well, the CER. And this is the directive in Europe. So these are a set of established mandates that look to create a set of standards across various industries, including critical infrastructure. And of course, for organizations, you know, it's of paramount importance to apply this, but also that there's a risk certainly of fines or penalties if a breach does occur. So we understand that, you know, passwords are the root of the issue, but the good thing is there are some solutions out there, and that's the session we're going to cover today, to look at the issue of the issues that presents itself in terms of security, remote access, levels of access for organization, and how those issues and problems can be solved to improve security.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Going.
Done. Over to you.
So yeah, but as Gavin was talking about these challenges and the mandates that are falling in, is these characteristics of critical infrastructure. And I mean, the term critical infrastructure is a really, really broad term as far as the types of industries that are covered inside of here. Now, today's session, we're going to try to use the language around industrial and manufacturing and processing types of things, but really critical infrastructure is very broad. It includes financial services, it includes medical and or healthcare as well. But there is some commonality in all of these industries, and obviously is the fact that they're all under attack, right? Whether you're in the energy producing sectors or you're in healthcare, you know that ransomware has become a real problem. And that these mandates that are being pushed out around the general category are dictating certain kinds of behavior. And one of the most important is the authentication of MFA, right? The imperative associated with, because if you can stop the initial access, make it much more difficult, it protects you from the back end portion of the data breach. I mean, I think that's a pretty clear indicator. And so, and we know that attackers are exploiting people, in particular passwords, and exploiting the traditional MFAs in order to be able to get initial access, right? And these are those challenges. It's very obvious when, like the Colonial Pipeline example that Gavin was talking about, when people are panicked or there's an issue that comes up, it becomes very obvious that there's a problem. And we hear this over and over again of a lot of these IT leaders that cyber insurance on top of the regulations are starting to tighten and create these problems. So the particular area that we want to focus about to address is how do you make change in these environments that can facilitate reducing friction, right? Because people have to be able to get their work done. If you put too many obstacles in their way, they will just find a way around it. And sometimes we call that shadow IT, right? And then the fact that these environments are heterogeneous in nature, right? They're very complex corporate production research environments, as well as the types of workers and the needs that they have in order to get their work done are quite complex. And then there's a third component in here that makes it so different from traditional enterprise. And in particular, it has to do with the fact that the production floors tend to be heavily restricted, both physically as well as digitally from an access perspective wise. And sort of the extreme to that is in the air gap portion of it, where there's no internet connectivity inside. And so the question becomes, well, if there's no internet connectivity or very limited, how do you get remote access into these? And these are the types of things that we're going to cover, right? But there is a statement we have to make about this, right? And I think this is a true statement for all IT leaders face in critical infrastructure, is that change comes hard, right? But the thing that we need to understand is that change comes hard from decades of success for many of these industries or the companies that are in these sectors. This is success driven, and so it makes it difficult to make these changes. And so we're going to try to address some of these things as well. And so Gavin talked about the presidential mandates and some of the regulatory things that are happening in Europe. And one of the things is that compliance is such a critical portion of it, right? And so we use the example of NIST 800-171, which is really targeted towards the supply chain and a key component inside of the these regulations, right? And so when we dig in, why we pick 800-171 is because regulations tend to be either descriptive, which describes the nature of what they want to accomplish, and the other ones are prescriptive, which tell you specifically what do you need to do. And NIST 800-171 is one of those that is a prescriptive that spells out the mandates requirements. And so we want to talk a little bit about this so that we set the stage of what is it that the organization has to accomplish. And if you're not that familiar with NIST, we're going to spell it out. So the most important one around authentication is 3.5.3. And you'll find this exact same language inside the CIS recommendations or IEC, but and PCI as well. But it spells it out in general for what is the requirement. It says use multi-factor authentication. Use multi-factor authentication for local and network remote access for privileged accounts. So what that means is any direct access to a computer system must have MFA in it, meaning onto your desktop as an example, or to any network-based application. And then it goes on to say, and then it says for network and remote access for non-privileged accounts. So that means anybody that has privilege must MFA onto the local machines as well as MFA onto any of the services and applications that are accessed remotely. And for anybody that does not have privilege, they must MFA for all remote or network access applications and services. Right? And so that becomes a real clear statement. And then the second portion of it that's really important, it is around these 3.1.12 and 14, which is that when these services are accessed remotely, you must centralize it and you must audit those accesses, right? And so now this becomes important because as the organization, as we know in critical infrastructure, especially in the industrial portion of it, that there is a diversity of workers, including employees that are part of the company. Then there's the contractors that are partially part of the company, and then there's vendor technicians that are actually operating and maintaining many of the machines inside of the production floor that are not are indirectly part of the company, but they still are accessing inside of that network. So that means that they too must be monitored. Now this is an important point because from IT leadership perspective wise, it becomes who's responsible for what, right? And dictated by the mandate is that if they're accessing your environment, then they have to be centralized access and that they have to be audited as well. And so that's sort of a nuanced point that's quite problematic for many organizations. And if anybody's ever done any scanning and I think that you'll understand what those implications mean there. Right?
And Don, I was going to say exactly that point actually. Certainly in talking to some customers, sometimes that is a very important step to go through and understanding exactly who has access to what, but also trying to, it's very difficult to take a broad brush across all of those user communities, and it's understanding about where the key priorities have to be when you're looking at rolling out a solution.
Yeah, because that's the responsibility, but and then of course there's a security element, which is that attackers are always remote, right? Or they're not always remote, but they're usually remote. And so it's distinguishing, is it good, bad? But from a compliance perspective, you have to control the access and you have to audit those accesses in order to meet these particular mandates, right, Gavin? Yeah. Right. So what's the problem, right? Well, the problem is that traditional MFA doesn't work in critical infrastructure. For the most part, it doesn't work it may work in the corporate portion of it for their web apps and whatnot for the business side of it. But when you start digging into the core of what happens inside of financial institutions, inside of healthcare, inside of energy manufacturing or production for critical needs, is that it's different, right? And in particular, we sort of focus on the manufacturing side around the Purdue model and these zones that the Purdue model that's outlined in the IEC, in NIST, and in SANS about this particular structure, whatever name you want to call it, that talks about these layers of layer 4 and 5 of the corporate infrastructure, the DMZs that separate the layer 3 and 4 and 5 from each other, and how jump servers are used, and the isolation that's required inside of it, is that the traditional ways of using email and using SMS text, it just doesn't work, right? And that becomes a challenge, is how do you meet these mandates in this unique environment that has different types of controls inside of it, right? And so this is where we're going to sort of dig in and show some examples of some strategies that you can take in order to take that modern approach of passwordless MFA, right, and bring this into these particular kind of environments. Right? So let's step back and let's talk about MFA. So MFA is sort of, by definition, is what you know, and you add a component of what you have and what you are. And so an example of that is that when you get the 4 or 6 digits on an SMS message on your phone, what that is that's proving that you have this particular phone that has been registered with it. Or if you're using a push strategy that has some biometrics inside of it, you type in your password, you get a push, and you verify by putting your fingerprint on it, and that becomes the two factors that get added together. Now, is that strong? Well, to a large extent, it's not that strong, because when the foundation of identifying the user is what they know, it's inherently not strong, because the first thing is what you know is something that can be shared, what you know is something that can be taken, what you know is something that can be guessed based on using social engineering or brute force techniques, right? And that becomes the anchor. And MFA was introduced originally because of the fact that the password was inherently weak, and we wanted to add more complexity inside of it to buffer the password. Now, today, we have other strategies in place that are stronger methods of authentication, where we rely on what you have and what you are as the foundation of being able to prove who that identity portion of it that you're trying to log into, because we know that what you know is vulnerable by nature. And we have tools today, many different ways of being able to do this, including using our cell phones that have very sophisticated vaults inside of it in order to be able to protect your identity factor. We have FIDO2 keys, like one that's pictured, or I have one over here, right? Oh, sorry about that. Here, FIDO2 keys that have biometrics inside of it in order to be able to verify it. And even today, there are badge readers that have FIDO2 capabilities with biometrics, like the one that's pictured inside of here, to be able to do the proofing that doesn't have a reliance on what you know, for being able to MFA local, remote, and privileged users as they're accessing to meet these compliance and do well from a assurance that the person that is coming in is who they say that they are. All right. And so the other element of this that becomes so important with what we talked about with the with passwordless MFA is the other element is this phishing, right? And today, when CISA introduced the program Shields Up back in 2022, they introduced this statistic that pretty much everybody knew anyway, right? Which was 90% of all successful cyber attacks or data breaches start with a phish, right? And so they're either exploiting their passwords or they're exploiting traditional MFA, right? And the way that you counter phishing attacks is the strong authentication methods, right? And in particular, inside of another NIST standard called 863, they talk about, okay, so how do you create an authentication strategy that can resist phishing attacks? And so now phishing attacks here, we're talking about like things like brute force attacks or social engineering, like push bombing or hijacking SMS cards or just telephone calls. Hey, this is IT. We just sent you this 4-digit code. Can you tell me what it is so that we can verify that it's actually working, right? And there was 3 tenets inside of it that it talks about, which is this impersonation resistance, right? Then the replay resistance and man-in-the-middle resistance. And those 3 simple statements by themselves actually have huge implications. And the ways that you are able to overcome this is, first, is you have to eliminate the reliance on passwords, because it doesn't fall within the impersonation or the replay portion of it. And clearly, it doesn't resist against man-in-the-middle attacks. And then it requires a layering of some cryptographic technology for binding the authenticator to the user and to the application that becomes really important. And that is the direction in order to be able to get to phishing resistance, right? You really have to go in the direction of a passwordless MFA, leave the dependency on passwords, and use these more modern approaches to be able to do these types of things, okay? So, but we keep on talking about MFA, about passwordless MFA, but the mandate itself says MFA, right? If the mandate is MFA, and we're trying to meet that, that's hard enough in itself. And it becomes, why passwordless MFA? Why are you making it so much harder than just trying to meet the very minimum standard? And I think that's a very legitimate question. Now, the answer to that kind of falls into, I used to have this boss, and he was this really tall guy, like 6'5", 6'7", was brilliant, an author and all this stuff, and he would put his arm around my shoulder, you know, much for short me, and he'd say, Don, enterprises only do things for 3 reasons: to make money, to save money, or because somebody told them they had to do it. And so that's really where passwordless MFA comes in. Okay, is that's why you leave the world of traditional MFA and leave passwords and move towards this passwordless MFA. And the first portion, we talked about it from a security perspective, which is this slash the attack surface, right? Is, you know, according to the Verizon DBIR report of, I think it was a 2022 one, is 82% of all of the data breach incidences that they responded to were started with a password or a user exploit, right? Meaning phishing types of things there, 82%. So if you can close that, you slash the attack surface, then you're leaving 18%, which is much more sophisticated attacks, which would be either vulnerability attack, which requires sophistication in coding, or supply chain, which is very complicated to be able to exploit, right? And so the idea here is that passwordless MFA eliminates the attacker's ability to exploit passwords or phish users once we get into this phishing resistant posture. So, you know, that's very significant, where you're buying down security risk. Okay? The next portion of it is that, you know, we all remember the bad old days of iPhone 5 when it first, you know, when iPhone 5 came out, where we had to, you know, finger the 6-digit code on our phone every single time it timed out. And yet today, we still force that on our workforce, that they have to go and type 12-digit passwords with well, first they have to create and remember that 12-digit password with an uppercase, a lowercase, special character, and a number, right? And they have to finger that into their work every day on every app that they're going through. And the BBC a couple of years ago reported that on average, users spend 22 minutes a day. So that's 5% of their day, right, on interfacing with their IT infrastructure, right? And so, but there's other ways to be able to do this where we can dramatically reduce that, you know, and as you would never want to go back to it, you know, as soon as they went to the iPhone 5S is when they introduced the biometrics portion of it. You would never want to go back to that. And why do we inflict this on our workers when we know that there's other strategies in itself that will slash the attack surface and let them, you know, regain back these 22 minutes, right? And then the third portion of it is when we go do the math calculations around this, is that passwordless MFA pays for itself in the first year because of these gains we talked about. You know, there's this 8x the ROI from the productivity side of it. Not only are there people spending this time, but if you're an IT person, if they don't use a password, then you don't have to do password reset help desk calls. And all IT help desk people know what a pain and a time drain that particular task is, right? And then the security portion, when we talk about 85%, and we take the cost of data breaches and we take this 82% attack surface reduction and we go through the math, is that it has a 35x security risk buy down. And that's why we buy cyber insurance. It doesn't make us any more secure, but it reduces our risk because we're transferring that by spending some money. And this is this is one of the ways that passwordless MFA ends up being a net positive from that perspective. Okay. All right.
And so I think that's the interesting thing, isn't it, about the business case, because there are quite a few factors in it. You've got the time that it takes the employee to work through the password framework. You'll need administration to make sure that those employees actually adhere to that, and also make sure when you audit that those passwords are changed. So you've got the cost of that, the time, forgotten passwords, call to help desks. There's quite a lot of areas where actually you can start to look at a hugely positive ROI. And then of course there's underpinning everything is the security. It's just more secure to remove the passwords.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Can I just add something here, please? Because even though we're saying passwordless, it does not mean that we get rid of the entire passwords. The passwords are still there. The only thing that we take away from the users is to manage the passwords. So Secret Double Octopus is managing the password behind the scene with all the directories that you have. Even though that the users can't see this process, they don't need to worry about any passwords, but the passwords are still there, and then they can be still used later on for any legacy applications that are still need those passwords.
Yeah, that's a good point, Samir, because there's lots of different strategies for implementing passwordless technology. Okay, and here when we talk about passwordless MFA, we are sort of taking a conversation that splits the idea of passwords from the user and from the infrastructure. Okay, and so for example, passwordless technology has been around for a while. Like in the U.S. government, they use what's called PIV cards and CAT cards, right? These are these ID badges that have smart card readers on them that have cryptographic technologies with a badge that they use to get into buildings, as well as they connect up to their computers that has a reader inside of it. Now, that technology means that you're using your badge, and a little bit expensive and very difficult to manage because you start, IT first has to acquire it, log it, ship it. The user has to initialize it. There's quite a few steps inside of it, and that's why it really never took off in the commercial world. But in addition to the way that the user did it, is the applications had to be rebuilt to understand PKI. Okay, you understand X509 certificates in particular, and then the directory had to be redesigned to do that. And so it became really cumbersome for businesses to try to take this strategy. And that's even the case today around FIDO2 keys today, is that these things are really inexpensive and convenient because the user self-provisions, but it only works with web apps, and in particular web apps that work with FIDO2 key pair technology. And so there's incompatibilities that are created as a result of that. So we didn't really want to go too far into the depth on this particular conversation about this, but there's different strategies for implementing passwordless technology. And the strategy we're talking about here that we call the octopus is where we eliminate the users managing passwords. I mean, they don't create it, they don't use it, they use other techniques that we showed before in order to do that. But on the back end side of the infrastructure, you have the option to be able to use things like FIDO2, because the Octopus server is a FIDO2 server, as well as when the application needs a password, we proxy that so that you don't have to change all of the applications in order to be able to accomplish the real thing you're trying to do, which is eliminate the threat of the users and attackers leveraging that kind of technology, right, in favor of something stronger. It's a little bit complicated topic that if you're interested, we can have a conversation and really dig in and explain what we mean by that. But Samir will show some demos that'll hopefully clear up this. Now, the other portion that we need to talk about here now is, as we get a little deeper into this, is well, what the other commonality that happens inside of all of these industries, inside of critical infrastructure, is complexity, right? Is that you have employees, right, that are part of our staff, that's completely inside of our directories and HR systems, and they need a set of depending on what their task is, they have to access corporate, they have to access the production infrastructure, they may be IT people that have privilege modes that are having to get into the infrastructure of the business. Then you have contractors, and of course they have more limited access, and we use policies and things like that to be able to dictate which portions that they have to get around, but they have a very broad set of production or work that they have to accomplish. And then there's vendor technicians too, right? Especially for ICS types of environments in manufacturing. You know, it's common to have a Siemens or a Schlumberger or a company that has to be inside of there that are running a big portion of the infrastructure, or at least doing maintenance on that particular portion of the infrastructure, and have to have access to it physically as well as remote, right? And so there's this whole diversity of work, and as we mentioned before, is this interaction of the kinds of work that they have to do is based around, one is you have to make sure that you give them the ability to do the work that they need to do while meeting all the compliance mandates, the security requirements, the cyber insurance mandates. And so we need to talk about use cases as we start to move in to show you how this technology works. And here I'm going to bring in Samir to talk through some of the use cases, and then we're going to shift over to some demos.
Sure, thank you, Don. In this presentation, in what you've seen just now here is the use cases that we cover as SDO. We start basically on top from the desktop perspective, where you can see a lot of customers or people are asking, how do we protect against desktop login? And that actually we have, sorry, Don, have you taken the presentation on?
Yeah, you should be clear to present now, Samir.
But I think the presentation, no.
We're going to show this slide just a minute, and then we'll switch over. Can we go back?
There we go. Excellent. Sorry, a little bit too early on the switch over there.
I think you're too keen on the buttons.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So the idea was actually to we covered basically from the Mac login, Windows login, and Linux login. Again, from bring your own device. On the workspace, especially on the services, we look at, for example, the VPN, on the Radius, on SAML, and we look at also the VDI. So all of those are protected or are covered by the SDO implementation. Of course, the last topic is the privileged access. Again, we do see that actually some customers will have either -A accounts, how we protect against -A account as well as the normal accounts. How we can protect against when we do SSH, when we do RDP, when we do PowerShell, remote PowerShell login. All of that actually is covered by the SDO protection. And also we talk about the method as well. So the method that we're looking at here is we can either use the mobile from SDO perspective, or you can use our mobile app, as well as you can use third parties such as Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, Okta, Verify, you can name it. Whichever you want to bring your own authenticator, you can do that as well. So again, the methods we can do the FIDO 2, smart cards, OTP. One thing that we haven't mentioned in here, and hopefully I'll show you, we can also still use the password, even though we said passwordless MFA. But in certain circumstances where applications are really old or legacy applications that require you to enter a password physically, then you can still do that by SDO, by allowing the users to be able to retrieve their passwords by using a biometrically protected application, the OTP or your Okta Verify or your SDO authenticator. Once you get the password, you can inject that password manually to the application if the application is required. Again, one thing that we are trying to push and we're looking at customers to actually deploy is the phishing resistant. Because what we know is actually just normal username and password or normal traditional MFA is susceptible to phishing, and therefore by deploying the SDO, it becomes phishing resistant because we've taken some measures in terms of protection against the phishing attacks. Okay. I'm going to share my screen now and hopefully take you to. We have slightly two demos. The first one is a live demo where actually I can just show you my. How the user experience is in terms of normal circumstances when the user starts to log into the machines and do the work. And then the second one is a recorded demo, but we'll take you through the critical infrastructure where we actually show you how the users trying to log in from outside, how they can get access to critical infrastructure without having actually to reduce on security level. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes, you can see my screen. Perfect. So What I have in here is just a normal Windows machine. Somebody's trying to log in. And then the first thing that we do is when users get to the login session, you'll see on the right-hand side, I've got my mobile displayed as well. And I've got my Secure Double Octopus app configured for this user to be able to log in anywhere they need to log in within the infrastructure. You'll notice on the left-hand side, we always usually customers, especially when you go to the passwordless, people try to actually decide whether how easy or how the user will embrace this technology. So we'll try and keep it in a way that you can give the users an option still to use username and password if they wanted to, but they'll have to receive the password from the mobile app using their biometrically protected application, or they can use the SDO and then they have the passwordless experience. From the drop-down here screen, you can see that actually I've given the users options to log in using the SDO app, as well as, of course, a FIDO2 or third-party such as Microsoft Authenticator or Okta Verify or ForgeRock and so on. Now, yeah, as you can see here, we've taken the need for needing the passwords. So again, the password is gone completely. There is a password behind the scene. However, if the user doesn't need to know any of that. So as you're trying to log in, you will get a pop-up screen on your mobile phone. And all you have to do, as you can see here, just approve the protection, the pop-up, and then you're there. And the app is still configured to actually be biometrically protected. So therefore, you have to have either the fingerprint or you have to have your Face ID to unlock the phone in order for you to use the mobile app. Once the user logged in here, again, as we decided earlier, if as an option, if the users or if there are some applications that would need password input, therefore you can see here from here, you can actually, the users from the mobile app, they can go and show the password. And then of course they can do that. However, the password would not be able to be shown because it's mirrored, but you'll be able to receive the password this way with a biometrically protected app, or from the desktop as well. You have an option from the SDO in order for you to choose the password. By doing this, as you can see here, I'm still says trying to retrieve the password. I can say, yes, it's me with my face recognition, and the password now is copied in the clipboard. I can copy it to any application I want, or I can just go and show it in displayed in here. As you can see, my password is this one now, for now. Again, the beauty of this is you can make the password as complex as you want, because the users don't have to recognize it, to remember this. They don't have to actually deal with any of this. So if you're required to actually, if you want to put your passwords to be 20 characters with complexity, you can do that, because then SDO is one responsible for rotating the passwords within Active Directory or within your directory services. Okay. So another option that we do have as well is, again, we have certain web applications. So we integrate with Radius and we integrate with SAML and so on and so forth. So the idea is, if I want to, for example, log into my AWS Amazon, so what I'll do is we have a portal, and that portal now is protected against with passwordless. Again, because the choices were given to me, I'm able to either use my Octopus Authenticator or I can use my FIDO Authenticator. Then my FIDO is protected by the PIN. So if I decided to go for the FIDO, I will do that. Just type in my PIN code for the FIDO key, enter, touch the FIDO key, and I'm in there. So again, and then you can extend this one to even your desktop login. So I can log into the desktop using the FIDO key without using the authenticator if I wanted to. So again, the choice is there. It's always, we always try and actually look after the users as well in terms of give them as many options as they can, so that way they don't actually feel that the solution is cumbersome and they cannot do the work. So we need to make it as easy as possible for them. Again, if you look at, if I wanted to actually do single sign-on to AWS, for example, you can see that I've got my authenticator in here. I'll log in there. I'm going to, of course, log in with my user ID, and of course, AWS is federated, and I'm going to use the user that I've used is my Active Directory user now, logging in directly to the AWS without having to go and create local accounts in the AWS. Again, using passwordless, as you've seen, we don't have to put any passwords anywhere, and the users don't have to deal with any passwords at all. Okay, and of course this will extend to the Mac as well. So if I go to my Mac now machine, again it's the same option. If I go enter anywhere, so you can see now my password, my it says sorry about that. So it says yes, it's me, and then with my biometrically enabled protection. So if I go back to my my Mac is actually there now and it's logged in properly. So again, one thing that we also do for elevated privileges or for sudo authentication, we can do the same thing. So the idea is if I do sudo su dash, I have the same thing now, and it says my sudo is trying to actually authenticate. Will I be able to say yes? If I say authenticate, my biometric is enabled. Then I go back, and you can see my Mac is actually enabled, and my sudo is now there. So the last thing that I want to show you on this user demo, if I want to SSH to a Linux machine, which I have in here. So if I do sorry, it's my Mac. So if I do SSH, my user at 2.63, I believe. Let me just check. The Mac is 63. Enter. And then what I did is with this radius, I've enabled it, but I've enabled to have the proper password as well as I've enabled it for an MFA. So what I need to type in, I need to type in the proper password. And then on top of that, you will notice now, I do have an authenticator, which is called Radius Authenticated now, and say, yes, it's me. And then I've logged in. You can see now I've logged in. Again, you can see that I've done the SSH. My Radius is authenticated, and all this way through Radius, through SAML, or through even desktop authentication. There's no password required. Everything is done passwordless using SDO, and then the password behind the scene is being managed by SDO. Okay, I think I'm done for this demo, Don. If we can just go back to the other one, please.
Thank you, Samir. Gavin, if you could switch back to slides again. Or let me share.
All done.
Thank you. All right, so we showed some of these demos inside of here of desktop, logging into your corporate applications, privileged modes, using a variety of techniques. And the last demo that we want to show you is really very specific to critical infrastructure. And here we're going to the Purdue model in particular, okay? And so the question becomes, as we talked about these three categories of workers, the employee, the contractor, the vendor technician, they're in some remote location where they're working out of the house in their pajamas, but they've got to get all the way through to the production environments, right? And of course these are traditional air gap with only access from the internal portion of it. And so here we see the layer 4-5, which is that corporate environment, and we're going to show you a demonstration of these users and how do they navigate first logging in to the desktop so that we have strong assurance that the desktop computer that they're using is actually who they are, right? Which is something that Samir showed you. Then they VPN into the corporate environments, and based on the policies that you set in your directories of what do they have access towards, then from the VPN, they need to jump over into the DMZ that creates that separation. Here the user has three identities. They have a corporate identity, they have a DMZ identity, and then they have an air gap identity. So these are completely unfederated identities and directories. And inside we have an Octopus server in each of these domains in order to facilitate passwordless MFA. So first he's going to log into their desktop with passwordless MFA, then log into the VPN, into the directory, the corporate directory over VPN, and follow those policies. Then finally jump into the DMZ, the jump server in particular, over RDP over port 3389, using a push-based secure biometrically protected OTP, and then from inside of the DMZ, they're going to do another jump to the next jump server, a nested RDP session into the production environment using passwordless technology once again. Okay, and so that's the demo that we're going to show you. How does all this happen of using a secure method to be able to get into the production environment? So Samir, I'm going to start the video.
Yes,
and
please go ahead. Yes. As you can see here from the beginning, is actually this is just exactly the same way as I've done. A user sitting at home, trying to log in, logs into his machine using SDO, using passwordless authentication, again protected by biometrically protected, and they're able to log in to their machine as normal. So same as the way I showed you earlier. So that could be on any machine, anywhere, but it happens in this case to be at home. Now from there on, they're gonna do a VPN to their home office, or to the office, sorry. They're using, of course, in here, the VPN. They log in, again, passwordless all the way to the corporate network. And then again, as you can see here, there's an SDO portal pop-up, biometrically protected, log in using their fingerprint, and then they can log in. Now, they've landed in their corporate environment. So from now on, they want to go back to, they want to go to DMZ, and they're going to go to the air gap. On the DMZ side again, they're going to go to the jump box, RDP to this jump box. Again, they're going to do authentication, but this time they're going to use OTP, the one-time password, the PIN, from the SDO mobile app, as you can see on the right-hand side. They enter the 6 digits, and then they're in. Now the difference here is they've got a different user. There's Bob in a corporate, and they've got another user within DMZ, and they've got a separate user for the air gap. And all of that is, again, because we are connected to 3 different directories, we're able to do that. So now they've logged in to the DMZ. Once they log into the DMZ, again, because the network is only open from air gap to the DMZ, therefore from DMZ, they're going to do another jump box into the air gap network, using, again, the same method by RDP to a jump box, using the OTP to log in using 6 digits. Again, this is another user or a separate user that is linked to the same user that logs in using the VPN. And once that is 6 digits is being inputted, they are able to log in properly. And then, of course, from there on, they can use their FIDO keys to be able to authenticate against any applications within the air gap network. So whatever security measures they have within the air gap, it still applies. They can use their FIDO, whatever they need to use. But we got them their passwordless all the way from home, all the way down to the air gap network.
Yeah, so yeah, perfect, right? And so this is that navigation we were showing here. And the main thing is remember, the user never knows a password, right? They never create it. They don't remember it. We give them methods to do this, and that OTP code that may look like traditional, but what you saw is it's the mechanism to be able to cross an air gap with no internet connectivity, is to prove of who they are and that they have this particular phone, right? And it's using push technology in order to be able to do that. And it's a very secure way to do it. And all of this technology is based around what we call the Secret Double Octopus, or the Octopus passwordless MFA. And the important part of this is that in authentication, it is a tight coupling interaction between the user, how they authenticate, with the application, and then with a directory that becomes the proof of that particular authentication cycle. And for the Octopus is this, we provide this as a cloud or on-premises. We showed you the demo with the air gap portion of it. Obviously was an on-premises implementation with a variety of MFA techniques and whatnot. But so that's what this architecture looks like for being able to do this. Let me pass this back over to Gavin so that we can hopefully close it out.
Superb.
Gavin?
Thanks, Don. So thanks Don, and thanks Samir for that. So here we're looking at 3 key takeaways to summarize today's session. So Don, if we can move on to the first one. 3 key points that we've covered today. So strong identity proofing. So yeah, as we've seen, right, identity proofing across all industries is important. For critical industries, it's of the utmost importance. We spoke about the fact that in some cases, critical industries sort of sit in the background, and we notice them when they're gone. And certainly, in terms of coverage across populations in countries, certainly this is absolutely essential. They provide essential services, and so the security around that, the protecting the remote access to the right authenticated users is of critical importance to this industry in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. Some people think add more complexity. In reality, we have these other ways to lower the complexity in order to become even more secure. Yep.
Exactly. Excellent.
On this one here, for me, is actually we are hopefully we can stop attackers exploiting password, because there's no passwords in the first place, because we've removed the entire password need for the users. So therefore, there's no password to hack. And then also because our platform is FIDO servers, FIDO2 servers, as well as we have some measures behind the scene to protect against phishing attacks. It makes it more resilient and makes the attackers, it repels basically the attackers from trying to attack those users.
Yeah, which is critically important. And then the third one, which I'll go ahead and take, which is,
sure.
Hey, you know what? They're our employees. They're the thing that makes everything work, right? Let's delight them. Let's give them a really streamlined workflow. Let's take that frustration. I mean, I hated especially when I misfinger type the second one and it's on the third one. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna get locked out, right? And the bigger portion of it from an IT perspective wise is that, hey, if you don't make it possible for all three classes of workers, including the vendor techs out there, they're gonna get their work done, right? And they're gonna start shadow IT. It's so easy to go buy a T-Mobile hotspot, right? And an LTE hotspot to just connect up to your network. And regardless of whether that's yours or not, it doesn't matter because it's in your environment, and shadow IT is a dangerous thing. So go ahead and be the good guy and delight your workforce.
Don, can we see if we got any questions at all, or?
If anyone's got any questions, we've got a couple of minutes left, so please feel free to type any questions into the chat. So while we're just waiting for any of those questions, Don, just a quick question that some of the audience may be thinking. So it's great to be able to look at what you have, and biometrically proof with regards to either a biometric key or using FIDO2. But what happens if someone forgets something? They head off to the office, or they lose their FIDO key in access to if they're remote working. What happens then? What's the solutions?
Can I answer that one, Don?
Yeah, go ahead, please, Samir.
Technically, at least from our perspective, you have two choices. If they've lost it for good and they need to actually re-enroll everything from scratch, then we can send them a link to actually enroll again or whatever. Now, the second option is we have what we call a bypass mode or bypass token. So, for example, if I get to the office, I forgotten my phone or forgotten something, and I need to log in, then the IT admin can give me a bypass token, and that token will be for 8 hours, 10 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, one-time use only. Once I've logged in, the next time I have to have the phone, or I have to go through the entire process again.
Yeah, and I think Samir, that's really part of the power of the Octopus, is it provides flexibility in the infrastructure. Of being really firm and strong with this streamlined workflow for the user, but then in the back end have flexibility of how things authenticate. So when there are sections of your infrastructure that's not ready to get off of passwords in particular apps, and maybe some directories, we can leave it that way. Then we can modernize other portions of it using FIDO technology, using PKI technology off of FIDO in order to be able to do that. And that's what our customers, especially the ones that are in critical infrastructure that have very complex environments, really like about it, is the fact that it is flexible that way. Oh, and I think we've reached the top of the hour too.
We have. Can we fit in one more question from the audience, Don? Can we squeeze a? So we just had a question. In order to work, I assume you need to install SDO agents on every client, but what happens if not all of your clients are managed clients?
if you need, I can answer that one. If you need only application access, you don't need to have the agent installed. The agent is only used for a credential provider. It's only if you want to protect the login to the operating system itself. But if you don't have that, but if you have, say for example, only web applications and you want to protect them with the SDO, then you can do that, and that the agent does not become necessary at all. Okay.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, great. So we have reached time there. So first of all, Don and Samir, thanks very much for that really exciting content we've gone through today. I think this is a really fast-moving industry. I think that there's some great content that our attendees can take away today. And also thank you to everyone who's attended the webinar today. We'll be able to make the slides available. If you do have any questions or any comments following the session, we'll also share our contact details. Please feel free to contact us if there's anything you would like to discuss. But we hope you found that really useful today. Thanks again for joining us. We know things are really, really busy for people, but as we said before, if you get any other questions, please feel free to contact us. But thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your evening or day, depending on where you are. But thank you for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much.